Okay, we're starting out our big culture map with the diffusion of English. So I have two colors, one for the historical aspects of how English spread, and then one color for the modern ways that that English has been spread. So thinking about the historical in the past, how English was spread, we know that it came from Great Britain. And so it started with British colonialism, right? So I'm going to draw my arrow to the US. I'm going to label it British colonialism. All right, because that is at first how English was brought over here to America, right? And there were lots of ways that this happened. Okay, when the British came over here, all right, here's my little colonist, okay? A lot of them came to flee religious persecution. So they came over here and started spreading their religion, actually through a lot of their colonies, right? And that's another way English was spread. Also, when they came, they brought their literature. Okay, so here's my book. And again, another way that they brought their language over, right? Because they were migrating from Great Britain over to the U.S., okay? And lots of the time, like, they went other places too, but when they went, they often took these things with them, okay? All right, so when colonialism eventually turned into imperialism, English kept spreading, okay? So when Great Britain and the rest of Europe actually, they started carving up Africa, but this is how English is going to spread to Africa, is through imperialism, okay? Because Great Britain and the rest of Europe actually started carving up Africa because they wanted their resources, okay? So it becomes imperialism when like a more dominant country starts to overtake lesser countries, typically for like whatever kind of resources they have. And we know that Africa has a lot of resources and raw materials, and so imperialism began with the breaking up of Africa. And Great Britain did that, so that's how English is going to spread to Africa. Also with imperialism, Great Britain is going to kind of overtake India because of their spices, okay? And they're going to make a whole company out of it called the East India Company to get that trade going, okay? And so, again, another reason or another way English was spread across the world, and this time through India, okay? And then the last, well, not the last pink arrow, but the last one coming from Great Britain is all the way over here to Australia. If you didn't know, Australia first started out as a prison colony from Great Britain. So they shipped off all of their prisoners to Australia, and so that's how English is going to spread to Australia. Now, when we're thinking about Great Britain, Australia, and the United States, we all speak English, okay? All three countries speak English, and so all of these pink arrows that we're drawing, right, this is an example of globalization. English is being globalized. It's being spread throughout the world, right? But when we're specifically looking at English in Australia, Great Britain, and America, we have regional differences, right? We have regional differences in dialect and in accents, okay? Someone from Australia sounds different from someone here in the U.S. Someone from Great Britain sounds different, right? You can change your Siri, the voices on Siri, to have different accents. And so that is a good example of regionalism here, okay, is we're all speaking the same language, but there are regional differences there in the way we sound and sometimes in spelling too. Now, all of this is taking place in like 1600s, 1700s. Imperialism is really going to take over in 1800s and like early 1900s, okay? And so America is going to join kind of the imperialism train, and we kind of start exerting our military presence. And so I'm going to draw an arrow from the U.S. to show that we expanded our military presence mostly, well, partly in like Latin America, but really all the way over here in like the Philippines and the Pacific Islands and the Korean Peninsula. So I'm gonna draw my arrows coming in over here, okay? And all of this is gonna go with U.S. military presence, okay? And so when we started having like bases in these other countries, that's going to be another way that English is going to spread when we have troops overseas, okay? So that'll be a way that it spreads. And then when we start having bases in other countries and when we start thinking about alliances with other countries, this is going to be like early 1900s, okay, when we kind of start wanting to have alliances with other countries. We start forming groups and we start forming economic like alliances with people. That's going to be another way, okay? So I'm going to draw some arrows coming out of the U.S. with a $sign just to show that we're kind of getting together with other countries, and so that's going to be another way that English will spread. Now on to modern day factors. Okay, so when we think about how English is currently spreading, how English is currently becoming like a global language that everybody knows. It's called a lingua franca, by the way. That is typically coming from here in the U.S., right? We've had our whole conversation about pop culture, right? And when we think about current like pop culture, a lot of the time pop culture is starting or forming the hearth of it, right? That's the start of something. That's starting here in the United States, okay? So when we're looking specifically at English, the English language and how it's spreading currently, there are many, many ways that English is being spread today. And so I'm just gonna kind of show that here. So today, grab your new color, and I'm gonna draw 5 arrows because I can kind of group these into 5 different categories. So I'm gonna draw 5 arrows coming out of the United States, and we'll talk about them, okay? So the first way, in class I had students kind of guess, and everybody did a pretty good job of figuring out what it was, what were the ways that English is being spread. So a big one, the way English is being spread is through entertainment and journalism. Okay, so this can include anything like your movies and TV and journalism. So like news, really, and things that are in print. Okay, and so that will be one way that English will spread. Another way that well, I guess I just told you that English will spread is through business and cooperation. Okay, so I'm going to put it on this arrow here. Business and cooperation. All right, so there are many like international companies, and so businesses will go abroad, and a lot of the time they will want workers who know how to speak English, and so a lot of people are bilingual around the world, and a lot of the time they can speak English, and usually that helps people in other countries find a job better or faster. And then with cooperation, that's kind of going along with what we talked about with historical factors, and that $sign right there is because we still have lots of, like, they're called supranational organizations, and we're going to talk about that in our next unit. But when we have so much cooperation throughout, like with other countries and alliances and trade, right? Trade is a big one here. Then that spread of English is very important to be able to communicate. All right. The next one we have is going to be education. So a lot of the time, English is taught in other countries from an early age, okay? And so lots of the time, kids are learning English in elementary school, and so they become pretty fluent in it. And then also, like at higher levels of education, like when I studied abroad, I had to find classes that were taught in English. And so in universities all around the world, there are lots of classes taught in English, and like studies and research and publications are oftentimes published in English because most people speak English. And if they're not originally written in English, most of the time they are translated into English because that's where so many people are like doing research now, and so it's done or it's converted into English. Okay, so education is a big one. Another one that you guys will probably all say right off the bat is the internet and social media, right? So many things on the internet are in English, and even if you happen across a page that's not in English, there's like always a button to translate it into English. And then obviously with the spread of social media too, a lot of people will use English for that. I know I have friends who are in different countries from when I met abroad, and at the bottom of like their Instagram post, there's always a little thing that says see translation. And so when I click on it, I can see my friend who has typed everything out in Mandarin, or I have another friend who has written things out in German. If I click that see translation button, it will translate it into English. And so that's all done like on Instagram or even on Twitter, okay? So that's another way. And then the last way things will be spread is through tourism. There's lots of travel today, right? When we're thinking about globalization, there's lots of movement between countries and people who go on vacation. And a lot of the time, the common denominator will be English that's spoken between people. And so people will communicate using English when they're on vacation or in the tourism industry, okay? So that's it for how English is spread today. You're going to hold on to this map because we're going to add to it later when we add in the religion piece, okay? So don't lose this map.